Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for yesterday. And what yesterday is essentially about is we center on the character of Jack Malik. He is someone who is a struggling musician. He's trying to do whatever he can to really make a name for himself, but every single gig, no one really seems to be really all that interested. And basically, one day, this power outage ends up happening. The power goes off for about 12 seconds, and when it comes back, Jack discovers that everyone has randomly forgotten the Beatles except for him, and when he plays this song one day, he sees how people are inspired by it, so he decides to use this to his advantage and basically copy off of their success. He's now going to use the Beatles to hopefully give him their success, but then of course becomes the question of, is what he's doing morally right? Or is this actually hurting the artistic integrity? And that's really all I'm going to say. So yesterday overall, I was very excited for this film. Ever since I heard that Danny Boyle had a musical film in the works, I was pretty much on board. And then when they announced that it was yesterday, that had me very excited. I love the concept of this film. It's one of the most original I've heard in a very long time, and it looked like it was going to be a lot of fun. Danny Boyle, I think, is one of the best talents out there right now. His directing style is one that is very specific, and I was excited to see what he was going to do here. Unfortunately, though, I have to say that while I do think the concept in this film is interesting, the way it's executed leaves a lot to be desired. Yesterday, honestly, is probably one of the most disappointing films of the entire year. I really was not a huge fan of this film very much at all, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I will say right now, that is definitely one of the better things about this film. There isn't a lot I like about it, but the cast is definitely one of them. Specifically, Himesh Patel, who I really am not that familiar with, but I really did like his work here. Jack is definitely someone who isn't the most likable character, and we'll get into that, but Himesh, Patel is so likable in the role that you almost do feel for him, and he definitely does a really good job. He's very energetic. You can tell he's having a lot of fun in the role, and I really did like what he ended up doing here. I definitely do see a future for him for sure. He's a very good comedic actor, but he's also just a good actor in general, especially when things start to go south for Jack as a character. I thought he had some real standout scenes, and I definitely do want to see more from him. If anything, this film definitely did show a rising star out of Patel, who I definitely am going to be looking out for in the future. And then Lily James as well. I mean, as usual, she's fantastic here, as she is in everything. She's very fun. You can tell she's having a lot of fun with it, and I definitely did like her here for sure. Admittedly, there's not too much to her as a character, but she does try to bring a little bit more to this character, and I think she did a good job with that. The chemistry between these two, though, is a little rocky, because when they're friends, it's really good. The two of them work very well together. They balance off each other quite nicely. The romance is when you don't really feel as much. However, James and Patel, they're doing what they can to try to get you to buy into it, and it almost does work. We'll get more into that with the writing, though, but overall, I thought they did work well together. Who really did not work for me, though, I have to say, is Ed Sheeran, who, look, I am a fan of his music, and I definitely do think he is a talented artist, but an actor, he is not, and this just did not work at all. It just feels very forced, like, oh, Ed Sheeran's a thing, you know, people of his fans are gonna go see the movie. There's never a point where it feels like he needs to be in this nearly as much as he is, and it just did not really work for me very much at all. I didn't think he was very good. Also, Kate McKinnon, I thought she was horribly miscast in this film. And look, Kate McKinnon's very 50-50 for me. Sometimes I like her, sometimes I find her annoying. This was one of the times where I thought she was honestly really annoying. I get what they were trying to do, but I just did not think she really worked here for me at all. She honestly just didn't really fit the role. I did like Joel Fry, though. I liked Himesh Patel's friend. I thought he did a good job for the most part. He definitely does have some fun scenes overall, but for the most part, this cast, they're fine. They're doing what they need to do, but besides Patel and James, no one really sticks out all that much. Now we get to the directing and the writing, which I'm sad to say is the weakest part of this entire film. And look, like I said before, Danny Boyle, I think, is one of the best directors out there. He has an eye when it comes to storytelling. He has a very specific style, and none of that is to be found here. This is probably the most non-Danny Boyle film that you will ever see. If I hadn't known going into this that Danny Boyle was the director, I would have probably just thought it's some average Joe. Like, there is nothing specific style-wise about this film, and that was very disappointing. It just kind of felt like Danny Boyle had this concept, and he didn't really feel like he knew what to do with it. He was just kind of like sleepwalking through it, and it really does show here. The film is not directed very well. It also seems confused with what it really wants to be. Is it trying to be a satire on the music industry? Is it trying to just be this nice rom-com? Or is it trying to be something a little bit deeper? It just seems a bit confused tonal-wise with what it really is, and the jokes also, they don't land a lot of the time. They're not bad. Like, they're very 50-50. Like, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. They do fall flat more often than not. But I just didn't think his directing was very strong here. And the writing is easily the biggest problem with this film, I have to say. Because, look, the concept of this film, like I said, I think is very, very interesting. The idea of a popular band like the Beatles, who have been such a big staple of what music is today, cultural-wise, and the idea that just the entire world, except for one man, forgets about them. There's a lot you can really do with that. And what sounds like a really interesting concept, unfortunately, though, just isn't very interesting. I mean, especially getting into the whole idea, they really don't do a very good job of exploring how the world is affected. It honestly doesn't seem like much has changed very much at all, besides them not knowing of the Beatles and a couple other things, because it's not just the Beatles that has, completely evaporated from the knowledge of the world. Like, there are other things that have disappeared as well that only Jack remembers. But it just doesn't really feel like much of anything has changed music-wise, and that's just not realistic at all. If the Beatles had disappeared from the subconscious of the world, I don't think music would be the way it is today, and especially when it comes to Ed Sheeran. I mean, Ed Sheeran is a British artist, and considering the Beatles basically cultivated, like, British musical artists, it doesn't really make sense why Ed Sheeran is as big as he still is. I just didn't really buy that at all. That really did not work for me, and the world building, like I said, is just very weak. They don't really do much with it at all, and also the characters, I mean, they're just not very interesting. Jack especially could have been a really well-written character, but they give you maybe 5 minutes to really figure out who he is. You know, we know that he's a struggling artist, we know that this is something that he wants to do, and we know he likes Lily James, and that's it. And it literally takes, like, maybe 10 minutes for the actual power to go out. Other than that, we know nothing about him. So it's very hard to really buy into the fact that he would do something like this. You really can't get behind it because you just don't know the character all that well, and I feel like he needed a lot more to him. He does progress as a character for sure, but the thing is, he was a flat character to begin with, so even though, yeah, he does have an arc, it's just not a very strong arc. It feels very predictable and one-note, and I feel like it could have been a lot more than that. That is nothing compared to Lily James, though. I mean, she has nothing here. She is literally just a school teacher who is also his manager, and she likes him. That's it. There's nothing else to her. And I have to say, in an age where we are getting so many well-written female characters, this just feels so incredibly dated. There's a scene between these two especially, and I'm like, how does this even work in today's climate? Like, I just don't think in, the way things are today, it just does not seem like a scene that would play out this way at all. And I have to say also, the romance between these two is so forced. Like I said, as friends, they do work, and Patel and James are doing what they can to make this work, but there's only so much they can do. The romance itself just doesn't work at all. You do not buy these two as a couple. They really try to. They are doing everything in their power to try to get you to like these two, the idea of getting these two together. Just from the first scene alone, I knew that's where they were going. So it really was very hard to latch onto, and they really don't do a very good job with it at all. It felt incredibly forced to me, and when they leaned heavier into the romantic stuff, I just didn't care. The problem is, that's what this film really is. It doesn't really boil down to much of anything else but just a silly romantic comedy, and for a concept like this, it needed to be a lot more, and that was definitely very disappointing here for sure. And going back to like Kate McKinnon's character, that's a character that honestly could have really worked. I do like the idea. What they're essentially doing is they're lambasting and say John Reed's character in Rocket Man, someone who is this big, record executive and things like that, and he wants to be your manager and he seems very serious, but in reality, he doesn't really care about you. He just cares about your money. He wants to make a profit, and you yourself are just a product to him. And that's kind of what they're trying to do here, is they're making fun of that. The problem is, it is incredibly on the nose and forced, and after a while, it just feels like they're explaining the joke, and we all know if you explain the joke, it's no longer a joke, and there's many times they do that here, and it doesn't work at all, and it doesn't help that Kate McKinnon, like I said, just does not work in this role. It just, after a while, it just got so repetitive, and I just did not feel it at all. She doesn't even feel like a full-fledged character. She feels like a stereotype, and the thing is, that's what they were trying to make fun of, so, like, that should work, but it doesn't, and really, the whole idea of, like, how the music community is affected, again, they really don't touch upon that at all, and there's so many things they could have dived more into. The idea that the Beatles, really did influence the culture, and the fact that they have this little significance on the world, like nothing really changes, is very strange to say the least, and I think they could have done a lot more with that for sure. But perhaps my biggest problem with this movie is actually going to sound kind of strange to you guys. And then obviously you need to see the movie to really understand the context, but just listen to me for a second, because very early on in the film, we establish that Jack is someone who, he wants to be an artist, but he discovered it through singing Wonderwall by Oasis. He sang that in middle school. It is what made him realize he wanted to become an artist, but also made him start to gain the affections of Lily James' character. And this is a song that's been with him. He frequently goes back to it. And besides, the Beatles being the band that they are, he really has no significance to it plot-wise. So honestly, wouldn't it make more sense for it not to be the Beatles, but be Oasis? Because we actually establish in the film that Oasis has also disappeared from the music scene. Oasis, nobody knows who they are. So why couldn't have Jack taken Oasis's songs and do the same thing, but with Oasis? And I get it that the Beatles are a bigger brand name. I get it that it's going to get more people in the seats. But to me, story-wise, it would have made far more sense if it was Oasis, because that I can understand. Oasis has been with him since the beginning. This is the group that made him what he is, that made him realize that he wanted to be an artist. Maybe he needs to go back to his roots. Aside from just loving the Beatles, he really has no connection to them. So to me, it felt like it would make way more sense to have Oasis in there and make all the songs Oasis. And there's just not really much of anything they do with that. And I feel like that would have just been a lot better. It would have made far more sense to do that. And it just didn't really work for me at all. Just him doing the Beatles just felt really forced. It didn't feel like it needed to happen story-wise. It just felt like the Beatles are a bigger brand name. Nobody knows who Oasis is, so we'll do the Beatles because people like them more. That's really all it felt like to me here. Also, the jokes, like I said, they are very, very 50-50 here. There are some that do work. Most of them stem from jokes we saw in the trailer. I do think that works quite well. What doesn't work as well is when they try to make fun of things that the Beatles have done. There's a scene involving trying to find a title for Jack's album, and they go through maybe the entire Beatles discography, and it feels less like they are, respecting their legacy, and more of them just, like, making fun of them, and it just didn't really work at all. There are many scenes like that here that just really left me with a very sour feeling, and I didn't like the way that was done. But scenes involving him and, like, Joel Fry, those scenes are fun. There definitely are some fun scenes for sure, but more often than not, like I said, the comedy does fall pretty flat here. There's also one joke they do involving the Beatles that I honestly thought was kind of offensive. I don't want to get into it too much, but I honestly don't know what they were thinking. Like, if this is a film that's trying to pay tribute to the Beatles and talk about, how great their music is and things like that and how much they influence the culture, And for a film that's trying to do that, it really doesn't seem like it respects their legacy as much as it does. It honestly felt pretty fucking shallow and just shameless to me, and I really couldn't believe what they did. But like I said, the writing here is just not very good at all. It's very, very underwritten, and that's definitely its biggest fault for sure. The cinematography, I will say, though, is really good. The film is definitely very well shot. There are definitely some scenes that I think are definitely really well done for sure. The power outage itself, that definitely is a really good sequence, and there are many other shots that I definitely did enjoy here. Nothing really stuck out to me, though. Again, being a Danny Boyle film, I kept going back to, like, say, the scene in Trainspotting where, you know, he's digging through the toilet to, like, get out the drugs and things like that. There's nothing on that level. There really isn't. And to being a Danny Boyle film, I expect a lot more, and that definitely disappointed as well. The score, I mean, it's Beatles music, so of course it's good, and Himesh Patel does a pretty good job with paying tribute to their music, and it definitely made me want to listen to their music. But aside from that, I mean, not really much else to say score-wise. And then the editing is, I think, terrible here. The film is very badly edited. There are many scenes that just kind of feel quickly cut. There are many cuts that are honestly really awkward. Characters will say something in one scene, and then suddenly they'll just be in a different location. It's very bizarrely edited. I don't really know what they were thinking there. So that didn't really work. And the ending of this movie itself, without getting into too much, it is so cheesy and so unrealistic, and I really hate it. I really do. I don't hate the movie itself, but I really do hate the way things did wrap up here. So overall, this film was just really disappointing for me. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff they could have done with it. They really could have dived more into how the Beatles affected the culture, but they didn't. They could have dived into who Jack Malik is as a character, but they didn't. They could have even, like I said, improved that one change. Make it Oasis and not the Beatles. Suddenly your film has a much bigger significance. Suddenly it actually feels like it makes sense why they would go in this direction, but they really didn't. The romance feels extremely forced and cheesy. The characters are really underwritten here. The jokes are very 50-50, and the commentary itself, it's just not really there. They really do breeze over a lot of what could have been a really interesting film. I really wanted to walk out of this and say this is one of the most original and inventive films of the year, but sadly, it's far too generic and surface level for me to really say that. And coming from a talent like Danny Boyle, this should have been a lot better. Honestly, this should have been one of the best of the year. There is no reason why this couldn't have been something great. And the fact that he left the Bond film for this especially really does aggravate me. Really aggravates me that he left it for something this fucking generic. This could have been something really great, but unfortunately, they really did miss the mark on a lot of key things for sure. Yesterday was extremely disappointing, and I am definitely going to give Yesterday overall a C. This should have been like my movie. Like, this is the kind of stuff I love, and the fact that it wasn't something great really does disappoint me. But either way, guys, if you have seen Yesterday, let me know what you guys thought of it. Love to hear your thoughts. And of course, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
Moving on.